one. Over the last 25 years, I've had the privilege of interviewing and highlighting some truly interesting people. Everyone who is anyone, both the famous and the infamous. From presidents and their first ladies to kings and queens, movie stars and pop stars, captains of industry, heads of state, sports personalities, innovative entrepreneurs, and some pretty fascinating everyday people. Today, I'm proud to introduce you to Dennis Sivers, a world renowned physicist whose work in his field has led his peers to name a physical effect after him, what is known throughout the world as the Sivers Effect. Professor Sivers, it's such a pleasure to meet you. I think it would be fair to say that in your world, you're considered to be a rock star, so I'll try real hard not to be a fangirl. Uh, Sir, let's start with your background. How did you decide that you wanted to pursue a career in physics?
Well, I've always been interested in physics, but it was more or less studying physics and finding out what people already knew. To have a career in physics, you have to do research. You have to do something, studying things that people don't know. And I didn't think about that until, as a physics major at MIT, I had to write a senior thesis, and I approached three professors, and only one of them took me. His name was Professor David Frisch, and he was a part of an active experimental group doing experiments on electrons, all sorts of different kinds of experiments. And he accepted me, and being part of his active group, I understood a little bit more what was required about being a physicist. And I decided I should go to graduate school. And Professor Frisch told me that I should, in addition to applying to Princeton, which was the one I wanted to go to, I should also apply to UC Berkeley and the University of Chicago. Turned out I didn't get into Princeton, so it was a good idea that I ended up going to Berkeley, and there I took some time to decide whether I wanted to be an experimental physicist, measuring things, building equipment, or a theorist trying to explain it to other people. And I ended up doing a little bit of both.
You know, in layman's terms, can you explain the basic premise of theoretical physics versus experimental physics? Let's start there.
Okay, well, the basic premise of doing research is try to answer questions that nobody knows the answer to. And I have followed a phenomenological approach. That's not layman term, but I will explain it as somebody who does calculations and guesses things instead of going in and trying to do a very abstract theory, and always talking to experimenters and trying to see if what you're doing makes sense with what they're trying to do, and help. And they are the ones that really can find the problems. So basically, in particle physics at big accelerators like the CERN Large Hadron Collider, or the big accelerators here at Fermilab, Jefferson Lab, experimental physics is done in large groups. Theoretical physics is sometimes major calculations get groups of many people, but basically theoretical physics, most of the things I do alone or with one or two collaborators. It turned out to be a very fascinating time, and by being at a very prestigious laboratory at that time, it really helped me get ahead of the game. And I ended up going from there to England, where I was a visiting scientist at Rutherford Lab for a year, and then coming back to the United States. And so it was really a very crucial time in the history of physics, and the excitement has not yet worn off yet.
So you would say that that sort of jump started your uh, global career, if you will,
Yes.
which allowed you to do so many other things, which leads me to the famous Sivers Effect. So tell me exactly what is the Sivers Effect and how did it become named after you?
Okay, there is a story about that. Uh, in 1988, I was working at Argonne National Lab, and a experimentalist there kept coming to me with questions about how come single spin asymmetries, the difference between measurements when the spin of the proton is going up and the spin of the proton is going down, how can they be so large? The theory we had predicted that they would vanish. They should be zero or approach to zero. And yet there were they appeared to be large. And so he asked this question and asked, could it be this? Could it be that? And I finally sat down and tried to figure out a way of doing it. And I wrote a paper called Single Spin Asymmetries from the Hard Scattering of Constituents.
Hmm. That's
And
a mouthful. I'm sorry, Professor Sivers. That's a mouthful. You can't just leave it there.
it
Explain.
made sense in terms of the problem,
Okay.
but it ended up refuting the idea that these things had to vanish. And it was very hard to get that paper published because people were still believing that it couldn't be something like that. In fact, a friend of mine named John Collins wrote a paper saying what I had proposed was wrong because it violated time reversal invariance.
Hmm.
And he was the guy that coined the term the Sivers Effect. So it was only named after me when people thought it was wrong. But it turned out I knew it didn't violate time reversal invariance. And so it turned out to be important that he thought it did because it enabled him and others to find a way of relating different kinds of experiments. And
How interesting is that? He meant it as an insult, but
no,
it
he didn't mean it as an insult. He thought I just needed to be corrected.
uh, see, only scientists consider it, oh, he just thought I needed to be corrected. Whereas you're being very humble, sir. This was actually very novel at the time.
Oh yeah, no, so I mean, there were probably 3 or 4 references to my paper in the first 5 years, and now there are about 1,200.
I think I find it very fascinating. And in addition, um, as I was reading about you, I'd love to find that you are quite the Renaissance man because you actually have a bit of experience in real estate development in addition to your physics work. So you have to tell me how the two of those came to be.
Well, my father, after World War II, got a degree in engineering
Mhm.
and moved to Portland and worked as an engineer for several years, and then started a construction company specializing in a certain kind of construction called tilled up concrete, where you pour concrete panels on the floor, on the ground, and then lift them up to form walls.
Okay.
And that's a very efficient way of doing a certain kind of building. So as a high school student, I worked in construction in my father's company. But when I went off to MIT and and uh, got a decided to pursue a career in physics, and uh, but my father approached me uh, when I came back to the United States from England and basically offered to give me a apprenticeship in how to be a real estate developer,
Hmm.
uh, which turned out to be important because my father passed away suddenly in 1985.
Oh,
And
sir, I'm
so,
so sorry.
my sister and I ended up owning a construction company, but we didn't know enough about construction, so we basically handed that off to employees and decided to focus on real estate development.
Mhm.
And we owned about 100 acres near the Portland airport. So I basically got started trying to figure out how to build things in the appropriate way.
Did you find that your knowledge and some of your research in physics aided in what your work became in real estate development?
Yeah, well, actually, the physics that I use is Laplace transforms, which is in financial terms, it's the future value of an investment. And that's the kind of physics that I applied to real estate investment.
That makes a lot of sense. So, what do you think is the most satisfying part of being a scientist or a real estate developer?
Well, they're quite different,
Yes.
and I have to sort of separate my discovery is the what's exciting about research, and finding a discovery. Real estate development, owning real estate, managing it, completing a well-designed building that's going to be around for hundreds of years is also very satisfying. In terms of physics, I think of very tiny things in the inside of protons. But in terms of the long term, it's nice to have a few buildings that you own.
It seems like you have the ability to satisfy both your left brain and your right brain at the same time, sir.
Well, I'm fortunate to have good people around me, a good company, and my daughter is currently the president of our company, and so I'm coming back to being able to spend more time working on my physics research. But I'm still involved in building movie theaters, and it's rewarding in both ways.
Professor Sivers, what's the one thing you would like a viewer of this video feature to walk away with?
That there are different ways of finding fulfillment.
Yes.
And if you try a few different things, you'll ultimately find something that you're good at. And I was lucky to find something that I was good at.
Something tells me you found a couple of things that you're good at, sir.
I think I'm good at physics, and I'm lucky at business.
Okay, well, I'll take that. I'll definitely take that. Thank you so very much. It's rare that someone gets to actually live their passion and find fulfillment with living their passion. And so it's been a pleasure to talk to you and to learn about your passion. Thank you, sir.
And thanks for asking.